The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 weeks after I had finally stopped leaving the porch light on for someone who was never coming home. "Harold," said the voice on the other end. It was Arthur Finch, the attorney who had handled my affairs for nearly 20 years. His tone was careful in a way I had not heard before, not the measured calmness of a man delivering routine paperwork, but something slower, more deliberate, the kind of voice a person uses when they are choosing every word. "I need you to come to my office this afternoon. There's something that's been in my care for a while now. Something Margaret left with me before she passed." I set down my coffee mug. "What kind of something?" I asked. "A letter," he said. "She asked me to hold it for 18 months after her death before contacting you. Harold, she was very specific. She asked that you come alone, and that you not mention this call to your daughter-in-law." I stood in my kitchen for a long moment after we hung up. Through the window, I could see the backyard where Margaret had planted her rose garden 23 years ago. The roses were still there. She was not. 18 months. She had written something, sealed it, handed it to our attorney, and asked him to wait a year and a half before giving it to me. My wife, even in her final weeks, had been thinking 3 steps ahead. That was Margaret. That had always been Margaret. I did not call anyone. I got in my truck and drove. Arthur's office was in the same brick building downtown, where he had helped us draft our wills, close on our property in Vermont, and navigate the paperwork when we sold the hardware business I had built over 31 years. He was a trim man in his late 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of handshake that had always made me feel like business was about to get done. That afternoon, when he met me in the doorway, he did not extend his hand. He just stepped aside and let me in. We sat across from each other at his oak desk. Between us was a plain white envelope. My name was written on the front in Margaret's handwriting, and seeing it that familiar slant, the way she always looped the H made my chest go tight in a way I was not prepared for. "She brought this to me herself," Arthur said quietly. "6 weeks before she went into hospice. She drove here alone. She was very calm." He paused. "She told me she had thought about this for a long time." I picked up the envelope. "Do you want privacy?" he asked. "No," I said. "Stay." I opened it. "Harold, if you're reading this..." Then Arthur kept his word, and 18 months have passed. And you are still standing. Knowing you, you're probably still drinking your coffee too hot and forgetting to take your blood pressure medication. So, please stop doing that. I need to tell you some things. And I need you to listen the way you listened when we were young, with your whole heart and not your pride. I love our son. I want you to know that first. I love Thomas, but I have watched something happen to him over the past several years that I could not name out loud while I was alive because I was afraid of what saying it would do to our family. I am saying it now because I am more afraid of what staying silent will do to you. Thomas has changed. Or perhaps he was always this way and we did not see it. But since his marriage to Renata, since the business failed, since the money became a question instead of an answer, he is not the boy we raised. I have watched him look at you the way a man looks at something he is waiting to inherit. I have watched Renata calculate. I have watched them together, and I have seen something I cannot unsee. I am not asking you to cut him off. I am asking you to open your eyes before it is too late to protect what you built. Look at the accounts, Harold. Look carefully. Ask Arthur to help you. And please find someone you trust to look at the property deed on the Vermont house. I think you will find something that should not be there. I love you more than any letter can hold. Margaret. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Arthur was watching me with that same careful expression he had worn on the phone. "Did you know what was in it?" I asked. "No," he said. "But I had my suspicions about why she wanted to wait 18 months. He leaned forward slightly. "Harold, about 6 months after Margaret passed, I received a call from a title company in Vermont. Someone had contacted them about the property in Stowe, inquiring about the process for adding a co-owner to a deed. The inquiry came from Thomas. The room was very quiet. "He didn't go through you?" I said. "He did not." I thought about Thomas. My son. 41 years old. Broad-shouldered like I used to be. with Margaret's eyes and a laugh that had once made entire rooms turn around. I thought about the last 4 years, the restaurant he had opened in Charlotte, with Renata's encouragement and my money, the one that had lasted 14 months before closing, the loan I had given them to cover the gap, which had never been mentioned again. The way Renata called me Dad, even though her own father was still alive and well in Phoenix. The way Thomas had started asking questions about my financial planner, about my accountant, about whether I had ever thought about simplifying my holdings. Just questions, just curiosity. That's what I had told myself. I thought about how I had believed it. "I'd like you to pull the Vermont deed," I said, "and I'd like to look at my accounts." Thomas and Renata lived 20 minutes from my house in a neighborhood they could not afford on Thomas's income alone. I had helped with the down payment. I had told myself it was what fathers did. Margaret had been quieter about it than I expected at the time, and now I understood why. The drive home felt longer than usual. I passed the hardware store, my hardware store, the one I had sold 3 years ago when my knees made it too hard to be on my feet all day, the one that still had my name on the awning because the new owner said it brought in customers. 31 years of early mornings and late inventory counts, and learning the names of every contractor in a 40-mile radius. I had built that from a single storefront, and a loan I had sweated over for a decade. Margaret had kept the books for the first 15 years. We had done it together. I was not going to let it disappear quietly. It took Arthur 3 days to pull together what I had asked for. When I came back to his office, he had 2 folders on the desk. He opened the first one without speaking and turned it toward me. The Vermont property deed had been amended 7 months after Margaret's death. A quitclaim deed had been filed, adding Renata Calloway, my daughter-in-law, as a joint tenant with right of survivorship. My signature was on the document. I stared at it for a long time. "That's not my signature," I said. Arthur nodded slowly. I had a forensic document examiner take a preliminary look. Informally. "She agrees with you." The second folder contained 3 years of transactions from a joint account Margaret and I had maintained for household expenses, an account Thomas had access to because years ago, when his first business was struggling, I had added him so he could cover emergencies without calling me. I had never removed him. I had forgotten, truly forgotten, that his name was still on it. The withdrawals were not large. That was what was clever about it. Nothing that would make a bank call. 1,000 here, 1,500 there. Transfers to an account I did not recognize. Spaced out over 27 months, totaling just over $62,000. I sat with that number for a moment. $62,000, taken in careful, patient installments from a grieving man who was not looking at his statements. "How did she know?" I said quietly. I was not really asking Arthur. I was asking the room. I was asking the version of Margaret, who had sat across from Arthur in this same office, calm and clear-eyed, handing over an envelope and asking him to wait. "She was paying attention," Arthur said. "She always was." I did not confront Thomas that week or the week after. I had spent 63 years learning that the first move you make in anger is rarely the right one. Margaret had taught me that, actually early in our marriage, when I had been quicker to raise my voice. She had a way of putting her hand on my arm and saying, "Wait." Just that. Wait. I could still feel the weight of her hand. I made appointments instead. A new attorney, one Thomas had never met. A forensic accountant. A private investigator who had been recommended by a retired sheriff I knew from the Rotary Club. I told none of them my son's name at first. I just gave them documents and asked them to tell me what they saw. What they saw was not a man who had made one desperate mistake. What they saw was a pattern. The investigator, a quiet woman named Carol, who wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, sat across from me in a diner on the edge of town and laid out a timeline on a yellow legal pad. The account withdrawals had begun 4 months after Margaret's diagnosis while she was still alive, still fighting, still believing that things would be okay. Thomas had known the account number and routing information since long before that. But the first withdrawal came on a Thursday in April, the week Margaret finished her second round of chemotherapy. "He started while she was sick," I said. Carol looked at me over her glasses. Yes, there was more. The restaurant in Charlotte had not simply failed. Thomas had paid himself a salary of $8,000 a month from the business account money that had largely come from my initial investment for the entire 14 months it operated. He had also billed the business for a vehicle lease on a car that, according to insurance records, was registered to Renata's sister. When the restaurant closed, he had listed the outstanding debts in a way that made it appear the loss was absorbed entirely by outside creditors. The money I had given him had vanished into salary and expenses that predated the failure. I thought about the conversations we had during those months. Thomas calling me on Sunday evenings, talking about the menu, the neighborhood, the loyal regulars they were building. He had sounded excited. He had sounded like my son, and I had sat in my kitchen, next to my sick wife, feeling glad that at least Thomas was doing well. I paid Carol's invoice in full and thanked her. I drove home and sat in the backyard by Margaret's roses until it was dark. What do you do with grief that has a target? That was the question I had not expected to be asking. At 67 years old, I had grieved Margaret's death the way I knew how to grieve, quietly, stubbornly, one day at a time. But this was different. This was the discovery that while I was sitting beside her hospital bed reading her crossword clues because she was too tired to hold the pen, my son had been systematically reaching into what we had built. It was not just the money. The money was recoverable. What was not recoverable was the image of Thomas at the funeral, his arm around my shoulder, his voice breaking when he spoke about her. I did not know, standing there, whether any of it had been real. I had to decide what to do with that. The answer came to me gradually, over several weeks, the way most of the important answers in my life had come not in a flash, but slowly, like light coming through fog. Margaret had not written her letter to destroy Thomas. She had written it to protect me. There was a difference. She had said it herself. I am not asking you to cut him off. I am asking you to open your eyes. She had known me well enough to know what I would need to hear. I met with my new attorney and gave her everything. Carol's report, Arthur's document findings, the account statements, the deed. She was thorough and unhurried. A woman in her 50s who asked precise questions and wrote in a small, neat hand. At the end of our second meeting, she looked up from her notes and said, "You have options, Harold. Criminal, civil, or both. Or neither, depending on what outcome you're looking for." "I'm not looking for a courtroom," I said. "I'm looking for the door." She understood what I meant. The process took 4 months. The quitclaim deed was challenged and reversed on the basis of forgery, a matter that, at my attorney's recommendation, was handled as a civil correction rather than a criminal filing, in exchange for Thomas signing a full legal acknowledgement of what had occurred and a structured repayment agreement for the funds. He had the option to contest it. His own attorney apparently advised him, after reviewing the evidence Carol had assembled, that contesting it would be unwise. I did not speak to Thomas directly during those 4 months. Communication went through attorneys. It was the longest I had gone without hearing my son's voice since the year he spent studying abroad in college, and I will not pretend that it did not cost me something. He called me the evening after everything was signed. I let it ring. He called again the next morning. I picked up. There was a long silence on the line before he spoke. When he did, his voice was different from the one I had been dreading. Not defensive, not strategic, just tired. "Dad," he said, "I don't know what to say to you." "I know," I said. "I kept telling myself it wasn't. I told myself I would pay it back before you ever knew. I told myself that for a long time." "I know that too," I said. "Your mother knew it. She knew you'd tell yourself that." Another silence. "She left you a letter," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," I heard him exhale. It was a long, shaky breath, the kind that comes after you have been holding something for too long. Was she angry? I thought about Margaret's letter. The careful way she had opened it with, "I love our son." The way she had said, "I am more afraid of what staying silent will do to you, not to him, but to me." She had protected me, but she had not written about Thomas with contempt. She had written about him with grief. "No," I said. She wasn't angry. She was heartbroken. He didn't say anything for a while after that. I told him I needed time. I told him that the agreement he had signed was the floor, not the ceiling that rebuilding trust, if it was possible at all, would take years and would require him to reckon with what he had done in ways that had nothing to do with me. I told him to find a therapist. I told him to be honest with Renata about all of it, not just the legal outcome. And I told him something I had not planned to say, something that came out of me without decision. Your mother still loved you. She didn't write that letter to end things. She wrote it because she wanted there to still be something left. He cried then. So did I, a little, though I turned away from the phone to do it. I sold the house in the spring. It was not an act of punishment. Thomas no longer lived nearby, and the house was too large for one person and too full of a particular kind of quiet that I was not sure was good for me. I had a long conversation with my doctor about that. I had learned in the past 2 years to have conversations I had previously avoided. I bought a smaller house on the other side of town, close to the river, with a yard large enough for a garden. I did not plant roses right away. I figured I would get there. A portion of the sale proceeds went into a scholarship fund at the community college, where Margaret had once taken night classes in accounting, the classes that had made her good enough to keep my books for 15 years. The scholarship was for students over 50 returning to education. It was not named after her, because she would have found that embarrassing. But I knew, and Arthur knew, and that was enough. The Vermont property I kept. I went up in September, alone, and stayed for a week. I walked the property line every morning, through the birch trees and down to the creek that ran along the eastern edge. Margaret had loved it there more than anywhere. She used to say the light in Vermont in the fall was unlike any other light in the world. And she was right. I sat by the creek one afternoon with a cup of coffee, the right temperature this time, because I had finally started letting it cool, and I thought about what it meant to build something. 31 years of a business, 44 years of a marriage, a house, a family, a life assembled from decisions made on ordinary days that did not feel significant at the time. I thought about how much of what I had almost lost had been saved by a woman who was no longer here to see that it worked. Margaret had known she was leaving. She had known she could not protect me from everything. So she had done the only thing left available to her. She had bought me time. 18 months of time, carefully measured, placed in an envelope, and handed to a man she trusted to keep his word. That was love. Not the easy kind. The kind that keeps doing its work, even after the person doing it is gone. I finished my coffee. The creek ran over the stones the way it always had. The birch trees were going gold at the edges. I stayed the whole week.